The release of that audio tape between Donald Trump and his one-time personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, and CNN's reporting from sources who say Cohen is claiming the president knew of the Trump Tower meeting has thrown the president's former fixer back squarely in the spotlight for what he may or may not say to Robert Mueller, but also how he's treated his one-time client, Donald Trump. It's a subject of much debate that will take up now between two attorneys who are no stranger to the spotlight themselves. In this story, Michael Avenatti, Stormy Daniels' attorney, and Alan Dershowitz, who has emerged as one of the president's defenders at time. He's the author of the best-selling new book, The Case Against Impeaching Trump. Michael, in the past, you've called Michael Cohen, quote, an absolute criminal thug. You've called him a co-conspirator. You're obviously in an ongoing legal battle with him on the Stormy Daniels case. In terms of this reporting and his claims about the president's knowledge of the Trump Tower meeting, do you think he's telling the truth here?
Well, it's a good question, Anderson. I don't know if he's telling the truth. I think he likely is telling the truth, but the guy has been all over the map for so many months and years that I think that as a witness, certainly there's questions as to his credibility.
Professor Dershowitz, if the reporting turns out to be true, and that's a big if, and the president did know about the meeting, there were others present to corroborate Cohen's story, isn't that a major problem? Or is that a major problem for the president and Donald Trump Jr., who between the two of them have denied the president's knowledge of the meeting 9 times?
Oh, it's a political problem, to be sure, but I don't think it's a legal problem. Even if the president knew of the meeting, knew exactly the role of the woman who was there, that she was representing the Russian government, and even knew that they were going to go to try to collect dirt that had already been gotten by the Russians on Hillary Clinton, that would be a political sin, but it wouldn't be a federal crime. And I think if this is the best that Cohen has to offer, I don't think he's going to be given immunity by the federal prosecutors. He may have to compose and not only sing in order to get that kind of immunity, because this isn't very much from a legal point of view. It's a big deal from a political and public relations point of view, but legally it's a 3 on a scale of 10, maybe.
Well, I mean, what's also interesting about Cohen's story on this, and again, if it turns out to be true, he claims that there are other people present who heard that as well. So if they're under oath, I guess, they could back up what Cohen has to say if, in fact, that is true.
And if it turns out there are no other people, right, that will affect his credibility as well. But I think the big picture is that even if everything he says is true, it's not a crime. In my new book, The Case Against Impeaching Trump, I set out a hypothetical based on this possibility, a hypothetical of even if the president actively sought material, dirt on Hillary Clinton, terrible thing, but even if he sought it, but the dirt had already been gathered and he wasn't asking them to hack the DNC or do anything criminal, that would not be a crime. It would show, quote, perhaps collusion, but there's nothing in the federal code that makes collusion itself a crime.
Well, Professor, about those tapes, you tweeted yesterday, quote, I didn't say Michael Avenatti was wrong, but that if he's right, how did he access that confidential information? Talking about there being more tapes. He implied there were more Trump tapes. Giuliani says there's only one with Trump's voice. Let's see who's right. Do you stand by that?
Well, I don't want to get personal at all, but I think it's hard to imagine how he could have lawfully gotten a hold of those tapes. He did, according to press reports, have a conversation with Mr. Cohen at a restaurant, and that raises some questions because, you're not allowed to speak to somebody who's counseled, who has a lawyer, and ask him, do you want to work together to hurt Trump? So I don't know whether that occurred, but if it did occur, I think Michael has to do some explaining.
Michael?
Well, Alan, let me say this. You keep saying you don't want to get personal with me, and you keep getting personal with me, including on Fox the other night.
I was asked a question.
Well, no, I'm going to tell you, I don't appreciate it. I'm willing to put up my track record over the last 6 months in this case up against yours any day of the week. I have been very, very accurate in my predictions and the statements I've made and the facts. And the fact of the matter is, on Sunday, you expressed considerable doubt as to whether I knew what I was talking about. And within 48 hours, No, let me finish. Within 48 hours, I was proven right.
I said it was true. I said it was true what you're talking about, and that's why it needs some explanation. You did guarantee the American public back in May that President Trump would resign. We're watching our watches and waiting to see if that prediction comes true. That's the one prediction that you really staked your reputation on, so your reputation will turn on whether he does resign or not.
Well, Alan, let me tell you, I'm going to determine what my reputation turns on, not you. I've made many predictions that have been. Let me finish. I've made many predictions that have turned out to be true, and we got 2 years left in this president's term. And despite the fact that he thinks you write great books, we're going to see what really happens.
Well, Michael, I want to read you something that you tweeted back to the professor on Monday. You said, "I'm awaiting an apology from Alan Dershowitz and others who once again were proven wrong. I stated in late May during the presser there were multiple recordings, and that was confirmed today. Unlike others, including Mr. Trump, I don't make public statements that are false." Because it's now the Washington Post did report there are about 100 recordings. We don't know the full nature of those recordings.
Well, back on May, I think it was 29th, Anderson, I stood in front of the federal courthouse and I demanded the release of all of the Trump tapes. And I stated at the time there were multiple recordings. And now we know that there are indeed over 100 recordings that have been seized. And I also want to go back to something that was said earlier. This information on the Trump Tower meeting, that's not the best information Michael Cohen has. I can assure you of that.
How do you know that?
How do you know that?
Well,
yeah, that was my question. How can you assure us?
Again, I'm not going to tell you how I know these things, but you know what, Alan? If you want to,
you may have to tell the ethics committee that.
Ellen,
you may have to tell that to the ethics committee if they ask you how you had a conversation with a man who was represented by a lawyer and you didn't ask his lawyer's permission, and his lawyer is now apparently complaining about that. So you're going to have to answer some of these questions. It's not enough just for you to say selectively, I don't have to answer that question, but I will answer that question.
Okay,
let's not get personal, but let's understand that we have to have the truth. Yeah.
Michael, I want your response.
Alan, you really need to start talking only about things that you know about, as opposed to things that you have no knowledge about. You have no knowledge of the communications that went on between me and Michael Cohen's representatives long before that. No, you don't know what you're talking about, Alan. Long before that restaurant meeting. You have no idea about the communications that went on relating to a particular or proposed level of cooperation. You just make it up as you go along. You need to go back.
So let me ask you a specific question.
Let me finish. You need to go back. You need to go back and concentrate on what invites you're getting on Martha's Vineyard, since that appears to be what you're really good at.
Well, I'm about to head off to a party, so I have to leave in a minute. But let me tell you, are you saying specifically that you were given permission by Michael Cohen's lawyer to have that conversation with him in the restaurant? That's a question you should answer specifically, because if you weren't given permission to have that conversation with Michael Cohen, you may have to answer to an ethics committee about that conversation, because I taught legal ethics for 35 years and I know a lot about legal ethics. And the one thing I know is you're not allowed to have a conversation with somebody who's counseled without the specific approval of the client to have that a lawyer to have that conversation. So I think you have to explain that meeting.
Alan, guess who gave me permission? Michael Cohen. He gave me permission.
That's not enough. That's not enough.
Mike,
that's not enough under the rules of ethics.
Alan, once again, you don't know what you're talking about. And you know what I want to know? I want to know about the relationship between you and Donald Trump. I think you ought to disclose the extent of the relationship. How did you get that positive book?
I'm happy to do it.
How did you get that positive book review? Why is it that you two appear to be such close friends now? And I think you ought to disclose what your relationship is.
I've met him 3 times in my life, all 3 times dealing with the Middle East. I have no relationship with him, but you have to tell you, I do know legal ethics, and getting permission from a counseled client to talk to that client is not enough. Look, I can tell you, I've been teaching legal ethics for a long time. About that, I am 100% right.
Michael, let me just ask you lastly, I want to ask you about the 3 additional women you say you're representing. You said that they're also paid hush money. Can you tell us any more when that hush money was allegedly paid, or anything else about the alleged relationships and any proof that they happened?
In 2015 and 2016, and I find it very interesting that we haven't seen a denial from Donald Trump or Michael Cohen all day. I would think that if I was wrong, we would have seen a denial. And Alan, I feel sorry for the students that you taught legal ethics to, by the way, because you didn't teach them the truth.
Well, they've become justices of the Supreme Court, judges, some of the most important people in America.
I'm sure they're very proud.
My record of teaching legal ethics for a long time.
I'm sure they're very proud.
I wish you had been in my. If you had been in my class, you would not have had that conversation with Michael Cohen.
All right.
Alan, I'm sure they're very proud. I'm sure they're very proud of your conduct over the last 2 years. I'm sure.
Michael Avenatti, Professor Dershowitz, thank you very much. I appreciate it.